Hey, everyone aiming for the top in the UPSC exams. You know we love diving deep into current events, and this one's a must for mains and prelims prep alike. Delhi had that earthquake recently, made the news, yeah. But what's really interesting is some people reported hearing a strange sound. We're going to break it all down for you why it matters for your exam, using this awesome piece we found in the Indian Express.
Yeah, this wasn't just Delhi feeling tremors from somewhere miles away. This time it actually started right there in the city near Khan.
Whoa, so this wasn't those Himalayan quakes we hear about sometimes.
Nope, not at all. See, Delhi's built on something called the Aravalli-Delhi Fold Belt. It's active, seismically speaking, but in its own way, it's kind of like imagine the Himalayas are like a young, energetic mountain range, still growing and changing all the time.
Right, full of energy.
Exactly. And the Aravalli range, well, it's ancient. Think way past its prime, only rumbles a little now and then.
Okay, so smaller scale stuff, not those massive quakes. So more about understanding how this zone works.
Exactly. And even looking back at Delhi's history with earthquakes, like the ones around 1720 and 1803, they weren't on that huge Himalayan scale. There's even debate about the 1803 one, whether it was even centered in Delhi at all.
Huh, interesting. So even what we thought we knew can change with more research. Got to stay updated. Okay, but back to today. This Indian Express article mentions Delhi being in Zone 4 on India's earthquake hazard map. What does that actually mean for, say, someone living in a Zone 4 city? What are the implications?
That's super important for the UPSC, for sure. Zone 4, it means there's a possibility of MSK8 intensity. Now, this MSK scale, it's super important because it's not just about how strong the earthquake is, the magnitude, but the effect it has on a particular place.
So like two earthquakes, same magnitude, could hit different areas and cause totally different amounts of damage.
Precisely. Zone 4, that MSK8 intensity, it means there's a real chance of major damage to buildings and infrastructure. That's why understanding the scale is so important. It tells you what's at risk. Just to give you an idea, Zone 5, that's the highest one in India, it lines up with MSK9 or higher.
Gotcha. So Zone 4 MMK scale all makes sense. But what about that weird sound everyone in Delhi was talking about?
Here's the thing with these earthquake sounds. They happen, but it's super rare to actually hear them. The article even quotes an expert says, earthquake sounds are a real thing, they exist, but it is very unlikely that you would ever hear them. So what folks probably heard was buildings and stuff vibrating as the waves went through. Easy to think that's the earthquake sound itself.
So hearing that sound doesn't mean it was some super unusual or super dangerous quake.
Nope. More about public perception and how that affects disaster response. Interesting angle, right?
Totally. Okay, so sounds debunked. But the big question everyone's got to be thinking is, what's the chance of a major earthquake hitting Delhi?
That's where the geology comes in and why it's so important to understand. Delhi might be Zone 4, but a massive earthquake actually starting there is pretty unlikely.
Hold on, wait a sec. Why is that? We just talked about how the Aravalli-Delhi Fold Belt is active?
True, but think back to what we said before. It's old, and the tectonic activity there, it's not the same as, say, the Himalayas. The stuff underneath, how much energy stored up, the stress, it's just not set up for those huge, catastrophic earthquakes.
Ah, okay. So even though Delhi gets these smaller quakes, the risk of a really devastating one is pretty low.
Exactly. The expert in the article even said the way things are set up tectonically around Delhi, it's just not going to produce a huge quake.
Okay, that is reassuring. But it also shows how much we need to understand the geology of a place, right?
Absolutely. And that's what the UPSC loves to see, not just memorizing facts, but the why behind them.
Right. All right, everyone prepping for those exams, remember this. It's not just about knowing Delhi's in Zone 4, it's about why. What kind of activity happens in this zone? What does that mean for the real risks the city faces?
Yeah. Now, knowing all this geological history, let's look at the real danger Delhi faces.
Okay, I'm all ears. This is getting interesting.
It's not so much about a massive earthquake happening. The real danger for Delhi is what even smaller ones can do.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Delhi's huge. Even a little tremor could cause chaos, right?
Exactly. Think about it. The number of people, all the infrastructure, essential services, even a moderate earthquake could really mess things up. Transportation, communication networks, water supply, things could get bad quickly.
So for someone studying for the UPSC, it's not just about knowing what seismic zone a city's in. It's about what that actually means, like for a city like Delhi in practical terms.
That's it. You've got to be able to connect the dots, see what the potential consequences are, and think about how to reduce the risks. It's looking at the big picture, and that's something UPSC examiners always like to see.
This is great stuff. So knowing Delhi's prone to these smaller earthquakes, how would you advise the government, say, on building codes or disaster response?
That's a great question. If I were advising them, I'd really push for earthquake-resistant construction, especially for the most important buildings like hospitals and schools. And retrofitting older buildings would be crucial too.
And public awareness, right. People need to know what to do if an earthquake hits.
Absolutely. Public awareness is vital. Educating people on how to be prepared, doing drills, having clear ways for authorities to communicate with people, all those things are essential to stop widespread panic and ensure a quick and effective response.
It's amazing all the different aspects of this topic. We've gone from debunking those sound myths to understanding the geology, and now we're talking actual policy. It really shows how it's all connected.
It does, and that's what makes the UPSC so challenging but also so rewarding. It's not about memorizing a bunch of facts, it's about critical thinking, putting those pieces together, and applying what you know to the real world.
Talking about putting pieces together, the article mentioned something pretty interesting about Delhi's historical earthquakes. The one in 1803, they used to think it was centered near Delhi, but now they're saying it might have happened somewhere else completely.
That's right. Researchers are now suggesting that it might have actually started in the Srinagar-Devprayag region in Uttarakhand.
Wow, that's a big change. What does that tell us about relying on historical records?
It shows how our scientific understanding is constantly evolving. New data, new technology, new research methods, they all lead to a more detailed picture of the past. So even though historical records are valuable, we have to be open to changing our interpretations as we learn more.
So it's like always got to stay updated, and even if something seems like a well-established fact, look at it with a critical eye.
Exactly. That's another key takeaway for you. The UPSC exams are all about critical thinking and being able to adapt to new information. Never assume that what we know is set in stone.
I love that embrace the dynamic nature of knowledge. Speaking of dynamic, let's change gears for a bit and talk more about this MSK scale. We touched on it earlier, but it's such an important concept in earthquake studies, and I know it can be confusing.
Sure, remember, it's not the same as the Richter scale, which measures the magnitude or the energy released by the earthquake. The MSK scale is all about how strong the shaking is at a specific location.
So two places could experience the same magnitude earthquake, but they might have very different MSK intensities.
Precisely. The MSK scale considers things like how far away the epicenter is, the type of soil, the types of buildings. It helps us understand why some areas might be hit harder than others, even from the same earthquake.
So knowing the MSK intensity is crucial for figuring out how much damage an earthquake might do to a specific area, and understanding why some regions are more vulnerable than others, right?
Exactly, and that understanding can inform everything from building codes to disaster preparedness plans. For example, knowing Delhi's in Zone 4 and could experience MSK8 intensity means policymakers can make smarter decisions about what kind of infrastructure is needed to handle that kind of shaking.
Wow, it's all coming together, the seismic zone, this MSK scale, the geological context, the potential impact, the policy implications. It's all one big web of information.
Absolutely, and being able to make sense of that web, that's what the UPSC is all about.
This has been so insightful, really dug deep into this topic, and to think it all started with a news article in the Indian Express.
It's amazing what you can discover when you really start digging and connecting the dots.
Now, before we wrap up, there's one last thing I wanted to touch on, this Aravalli-Delhi Fold Belt. You mentioned it's really slowed down over millions of years?
Right, remember it all started millions of years ago when the Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate. That collision created the Aravalli Range, and all that tectonic activity caused tons of earthquakes back then.
So the Aravalli Range is kind of like a reminder of a more chaotic past.
Exactly. But as the Indian plate kept moving north, the pressure on the Aravalli-Delhi Fold Belt lessened. The plate settled into a more stable position, and the earthquakes became less frequent and less intense.
So, like, the initial impact caused all this instability, but things have calmed down over time.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. The Aravalli-Delhi Fold Belt is still considered seismically active, but it's not what it used to be.
Fascinating. So even though it's still technically active, the risk of major earthquakes has gone way down over millions of years.
Exactly, and that's why understanding the geological history of a region is so important for assessing the earthquake risk today.
Okay, so we've covered Delhi's earthquake history, the MSK scale, the geological story of the Aravalli-Delhi Fold Belt, and even talked about some policy implications.
It's been a truly in-depth deep dive, and for those of you studying for the UPSC, remember, it's not just about knowing the facts, it's about understanding the connections, analyzing what they mean, and using that knowledge in real-world situations.
Well said. Now, before we go, let's move on to our final part where we'll leave you with a question to think about. All right, so we've learned a ton, from the actual science behind earthquakes to the ways the government can use this stuff to make policy. But here's the big one, especially for anyone going for that IAS chair. How do we take all this knowledge and actually use it to protect Delhi?
Yeah, that's the core of it, right? Debunked the myths, looked at the history, but for someone who's going to be an IAS officer, it's got to be about action.
So we know smaller earthquakes are likely, big ones not really a threat. Where do we even start?
Well, first, gotta accept that even those smaller quakes can cause huge disruption in a city as big and crowded as Delhi. That means building codes have to reflect that reality. Not just new buildings, but updating the ones we've already got. Imagine if a hospital or a school isn't built to withstand even a moderate earthquake.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. It's like we're playing chess with nature almost. We know her moves, got to set up our pieces the right way to counter them.
Exactly. Invest in those early warning systems. They can buy precious seconds for people to get ready. And public awareness, oh man, that's huge. People knowing what to do during an earthquake, that can literally save lives. Think drills, clear communication from the authorities.
Reminds me of that old saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Seems to fit here perfectly.
Couldn't agree more. And this is where understanding the Aravalli-Delhi Fold Belt, the specifics of it, really matters. We're not preparing for those massive Himalayan scale events, so our resources can be used more effectively, targeted where they'll do the most good.
So all this knowledge, it's not just about passing an exam, it's about giving future leaders the tools to make a real difference on the ground, keep people safe.
That's what being an IS officer is, making a positive impact. And for everyone listening, think about this. How can WE use what we've learned today to make Delhi more resilient, make India safer as a whole? It's a challenge worth tackling.
Yeah, what a great challenge. Drop your thoughts, ideas, solutions in the comments. Let's get a discussion going. And remember, all this came from a really informative article in the Indian Express. Definitely worth a read if you want to dive even deeper.
Keep learning, keep those questions coming, and best of luck on your UPSC journey.
And that wraps it up for another deep dive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share this with all your fellow aspirants. We'll see you next time.